Okay, welcome to this episode of Conscious Conversations. I'm Erin Sharaf, where I bring you people, healers who are bringing their gifts and their talents to the world to facilitate healing for people and the planet. And today I'm really excited to get to introduce you to Jonathan Glass. And Jonathan is the author of the book, The Total Life Cleanse, and co-creator of the Total Life Cleanse program. He's a master acupuncturist, Ayurvedic practitioner, herbalist, and natural health educator. Jonathan served on the faculty of the New England School of Acupuncture and the Dharma Institute of Yoga and Ayurveda. He has facilitated individual and group-supported transformational cleanse programs for over 20 years. Jonathan's been in private practice since 1987, when he co-founded the Healing Essence Center with his wife, Catherine, which happens to be located in Concord, Massachusetts, where I spend a good part of my time. And he presents locally and nationally at places like Kripalu. And Jonathan has a longer bio with a lot of other kind of skills and tricks in his bag of tricks, and that some of that might come out as we talk with him. But thank you so much for being here with us, Jonathan. So thrilled to have you.
Sure, really happy to be here. Thank you.
And so you've got such broad and deep knowledge of the healing arts. I would love it if you could start by kind of giving us just a sense of your journey and evolution and how you got to where you are today.
Okay. So, yeah, I think I was interested in this kind of work early on, and I had a massage when I was about 9 years old after having a neck injury playing baseball. The nurse at my camp actually did shiatsu, which is pretty amazing because that was 1970. And I remember being in a lot of pain, and then literally in 10 minutes, my pain was completely gone. So it just completely blew my mind. And that's sort of miraculous, and it was. But I didn't know that was even possible. And for whatever it's worth, I used to just really like giving people neck and shoulder massages as a kid, and people always said I was really good at it. So I just, early on, I developed an interest. In my teens, around 16, you may have heard of the book Be Here Now by Ram Dass. I read that book with a friend of mine at camp. We were counselors at a camp, and that summer 8 weeks we dedicated to meditating every day. And so I discovered that that whole reality was a reality. And not only did it help my inner being, but it helped me play soccer better, play baseball better, do all the things that I was, communicate better, be less anxious, as a young teenager. So it was quite amazing. And so I just gradually got into that world, started practicing yoga, noticed how that affected my athletics and concentration in school. So one thing led to another. I ended up, long story, sort of fast forward, I went to India, lived in an ashram for a while, studied Ayurveda and homeopathy, and then I came back and studied massage therapy in Northern California at the beautiful Heartwood Institute in Northern California, and got into herbs, nutrition, and finally acupuncture. So that's kind of my journey. Now, obviously in this kind of work, what's really wonderful about it is that you get to keep learning. It's never a dull moment, really. I mean, there's always more to learn. So that's it in a nutshell. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And so it sounds like you really have had a natural inclination for this work from a very young age, which is very cool. And I'm sure there's no shortage of business for you. There's no shortage, unfortunately, of disease in our society. And so would love to get your take on the causes of this epidemic of disease that we're seeing in our culture, where we're spending more money on healthcare and medicine than any civilization in the history of the world, and we're getting sicker and sicker. Would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, it's a really vast subject. So I like to try to simplify it, and then from there, there's unlimited innuendos. But I go by a few different models, really. But the Ayurvedic model is the foundation. And what applied thousands of years ago really applies now, and there's a certain kind of wisdom that's there. In Ayurveda, they say there's two causes of disease. And the first cause is when we ignore our own intuition, knowledge, and experience. So it's actually a cool word. It's called pragyaparad. And aparad means to offend, and pragya means your own knowledge. So it's knowledge and intuition.
I love that.
And even in the word aparad is the word radha, which means pure love. So it's a very, very powerful way of looking at the cause of all disease. And then the secondary cause of disease is called ama, which means toxin. And so toxin can be internally generated, you know, if say our digestion is not very good, or it can be externally generated, which is very common these days because we have, you know, an abundance of chemicals, heavy metals, pathogens, you know, so many herbicides, pesticides, toxins in the food, in the air, in the water. So what was true back then is true now. It's just everything's amping up. And then there's toxins on different levels. So there's physical toxins. And then in Ayurveda, it makes it very clear that there's mental toxins and there's emotional toxins, where they say that Ayurveda is all about digestion. So if somebody has an emotional or an experience that they haven't digested, then that can be somatized and into the tissues of the body. So they say the cause of all emotional imbalances are undigested experiences. So that's happening on that level. And we have, you know, mental, sensual, meaning the senses, imbalances. So the idea is that even the senses have to digest what they take in. The mind has to digest it, the intelligence has to digest it. But we're being overwhelmed these days. You know, in Chinese medicine and in Ayurveda, the small intestine is called the sorter. It sorts the pure from the impure. It's a part of us physically, mentally, and emotionally that sorts out, is this good for me, is this not good for me? Is this a nutrient or is this not a nutrient? And the same thing happens when we use our senses around mind, and we have so much influx coming in. It's almost like we're exposed to sensory junk food constantly. And that affects not just the mind, but it affects the organs itself. So it literally affects the small intestine. It affects our capacity to digest. I mean, some of the biggest diseases right now are digestive issues, which then people go on pretty heavy duty drugs, which oftentimes cause worse diseases. So it's a vicious cycle. But in a nutshell, food issues, food imbalances, whether foods that you're sensitive to or inappropriate for a certain person, toxins, meaning heavy metals, chemicals, like that, immune factors, viruses, bacteria, molds, fungus, parasites, very, very common. What else? Even scars can be an issue for people. So many surgeries, and because we're bioelectric beings, literally the scar tissue can interfere with the energy flow or the chi or the prana to different organ systems. So that's kind of the model that I'm looking at when I'm working with people. So I'm trying to identify what are the stressors. And then by removing the stressors, the body's innate intelligence starts working better. And then there's other things you can do to support that process as well. So.
Wow, that was so interesting. In the very first thing you said, I love that word. I've never heard that word before. Could you just say that word one more time?
Yeah, sure. I'll break it. It's pragyaparad, but it's two words together, pragya. And pragya is a weird word because it's spelled like Prajna. So that's almost like nya, sort of GN sound. Prajna, aparad. And again, prajna means knowledge or experience, and it can also indicate just common sense, intuition. It's not necessarily psychic, but it can include that. And then aparad means to go, apa means to go against, and actually radha means love. So when you're really going against yourself is aparad, is pragyaparad. So it's a really powerful word because, I mean, in a very simple way, a lot of times we know common sense, like, oh, I probably, it's probably not so good to me to to eat that food, to hang out with that person, to do this, to do that. But we do it anyway because we bypass our own knowing. And that is considered in Ayurveda to be a, it's actually, aparad also means offend. When we offend ourselves. So it's an interesting thing.
It's really an interesting thing. And
yeah.
I love that you started with that. And I think we live in a culture where we're taught to offend our own selves, right? We're supposed to fit in. We've got this factory model of schooling. We're almost sort of conditioned away from health by a lot of our systems. Would you agree with that?
Totally. I mean, like you said, the educational system has a lot of big issues, and then, the GMO and the things we put in our food, and we're sort of guilted into thinking that that's the best thing and the only thing, or there's big issues around vaccinations, and there's a lot of social pressure around that, and there's a ton of loopholes where they're not really responsible for doing the kind of research that every other drug in America is required to go through, except for these vaccinations. So there's some huge issues that are happening. And one thing I didn't mention is the cellular issue, and meaning Wi-Fi and all that stuff, and how that can affect us. And we have 5G coming, which is there just isn't much sophistication in terms of the companies that are promoting it. I mean, they may know it, they probably do, but how is it really interacting with the human energy field? Now, how is it interacting with us? Really, and we're being assaulted by these frequencies constantly. So, yeah, so it's things are pretty intense right now, actually, and we have to. And my feeling is that we have to amp up our strength in as many ways as we can, and eliminate as many stressors as possible, so that we have, we can live the best lives that we can.
Yeah. It's so interesting what you're saying, and my background being traditional medicine, I'm just thinking that my education in traditional medicine was more the gross level of things, if you will, where when people came to us, all of their more subtle systems, as you're describing, were pretty depleted and assaulted. And we were giving them drugs, procedures, doing the best we could with what we had. And in some ways that was adding to the assault in terms of the toxic load. And so I think what you're saying, if we could bring this out into the conversation and have a more comprehensive view systemically as a nation, as a culture, I almost think if we don't do this, the default is disease. That's the default state. Whereas the default state used to be wellness. The bodies knew how to be healthy. But now with everything that you're describing, the default state is disease almost.
Right. I mean, years ago, I remember, the doctors used to say, oh, you don't need supplements, you don't need this or that, just eat good food. And it was almost true. It was almost true a number of years ago. But now they can't even really say that, because it's not that easy to eat really healthy food for a lot of people. I mean, yes, you can get relatively healthy food, and yes, you can get organic, but you have to make an effort. You have to make an effort, more so now than even 20, 30 years ago. So, yeah. There's a lot more challenges. And, you mentioned something about Western or modern medicine. And, I do respect modern medicine. I don't, I'm not like, every time I've become overly judgmental of it, I learn a lesson about it. You know what I mean? I get humbled a little bit, because there's definitely some amazing technology. There's some benefits, and there's certain things that, there's certain range, that things that doctors just know really well. But when they're out of that range, that's the problem. And also because right now in the system, the way it is, they're not really allowed to do certain things. They're not really allowed to use herbs unless they want to do their own independent practice. If they want to stay in the insurance world and all that, they can't use herbs. So they have to use a much more invasive substance to get a job done, when there might be something that, you know, is 80% less invasive for the body. That we don't need that drug when we can take this herb and have a better effect and a less negative effect and a less toxic effect. So the systems are, it's a very challenging system because of that.
Right.
They're
Right.
not
And just
a lot of doctors, as intelligent as they are, they're not allowed to think for themselves. You know, they're not in that system. They're only allowed to think in a very narrow realm, which is too bad because they're smart people, a lot of them.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear that I totally agree with Jonathan in terms of, I mean no disrespect to my colleagues, my friends that are in traditional Western medicine. I totally appreciate the incredible job that you're doing. And the system, you know, has incredible gifts in terms of the technology. And if there's acute trauma, we're better than that than anyone in the world. So yeah, not a total dismissal of that system. And definitely not of the people in that system at all, but to broaden the conversation and have there be a more integrative approach, I think would be the best for our collective health.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so just one more question, if you would, about Ayurveda, Jonathan, because it's such a, and I know it's an incredibly complex topic and there's no way we'd have time to go into all of it, but they have a particular opinion in terms of who we are, the sages of Ayurveda. Is there a little bit you can say about that?
That's a big question. I could go on for a couple hours. But okay, so you know, the Vedic system is sort of a, you could say it's a vertical system in a way. Chinese medicine is more circular in a way. Ayurveda is more up and down a little bit, in the sense that there's, how can I say this without getting too complex? The idea is that, I'll just put it this way, that from a Vedic perspective, we are spiritual beings. We are the soul. We are what's called the Atma. And the Atma means consciousness. We are that pure consciousness. And we are conditioned, we come into this world, and to explain why we come into this world, there's actually lots of understandings about that, but we do. And I think to get into that might be too much right now. But we're here. We have a mind, we have an intellect, we have an ego, and we have a body. So the mind, intelligence, and ego is called the subtle body, and then the physical body is the physical body. So, and we all come in with the different tendencies, impressions from what they say is previous lifetimes. And the goal, the first goal is to realize that we are that spiritual being. But Ayurveda is very beautiful because it really comes from the perspective of you are a spiritual being, but you have this body and mind. So how do you best create health, a good life, fulfill your life purpose, fulfill your economic needs, fulfill your need for happiness and pleasure, fulfill your spiritual goals and your sense of freedom and liberation. How do you do all that while you're living in this world with this body and mind? So that's really what Ayurveda is about. And it is very sophisticated. And it is very, very scientific, actually. But what's beautiful about it is that they come from the perspective immediately, right up front, that you're a spiritual being and there is a purpose of life. The purpose of life is to live your purpose while you're here, and also ultimately to realize your divine identity. I mean, they take that as very, very real. It's not like a cute new agey concept. It's part of their system. It's part of their system. You know, so yeah. So I think maybe that's enough for right now on that. We can talk more. Is
it similar to the concept of Dharma in yoga?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in Ayurveda, there's 4 main goals of life, and Dharma is the first goal. So Dharma is Dharma is generally loosely translated as, your purpose or what it is you love to do. It also really means, in Ayurveda, it's more of it means your duty, but it doesn't mean your duty like somebody has a whip behind you and telling you to do it. It's kind of like your duty because you are designed for that. It's like in your DNA. It's who you are. So they say the Dharma of fire is heat and light. If there's a fire, it's always going to put out heat and light. It's not going to one day be a cold fire. It's always going to be a hot fire.
Mm-hmm.
So, finding what our purpose is in one sense is our Dharma. And then even deeper than that, our deeper Dharma is discovering our true being, our true essence, as who we really are.
And that's such a great point, because it gets back to the root of disease that you mentioned, the very first thing, the dishonoring of who we are and that innate intuition, where we may have a little beautiful being who came into this world because their gift is song, for example, and then the culture is saying, well, no, you have to spend all your time doing math and reading. And again, nothing wrong with math and reading. But if that little being, if their purpose, their Dharma, whatever word you want to put around it, is to express their gifts through song, and they're stuffing that or feeling shame around it, that's a problem, correct?
Right. Absolutely, and that's a huge thing. So we have our, our spiritual Dharma, and then even our conditioning, even who we come in to be. I mean, some people really have the nature to be a police officer. That's really, they like protecting, they like that kind of thing. Some people really love doing business. If that business person is told, no, you can't be a business person, you have to be a police officer, that person will suffer. Or if somebody's very spiritually oriented and they want to be a priest or a rabbi or a yogi or a, some kind of spiritual something or other, and they're told, no, you have to be a businessman or an artist or a police officer, then that's also not honoring Dharma. And that's why in the Vedic culture, astrology was actually, seen as a very important thing. It was actually seen as the most profound material science. And we don't really think of astrology as a science, but in the Vedic culture, they really do. And if you've ever had a Vedic astrology reading with a really good Vedic astrologer, I mean, I can tell you some stories that would just blow your mind about sometimes of the accuracy. And it's not just about destiny. It's really about, it's like if it's going to rain, then it's going to rain. How you react to the rain is your free choice. Do you know what I mean? I mean, we can't control the rain, the weather's, but we can put on a raincoat, or we can, that's how astrology can kind of help us. But it also can help to identify someone's nature. In the ancient Vedic culture, they wouldn't make a child do anything until they were 5 years old. And traditionally, they would never chastise a child until they were about 5 years old, because it was all about letting the child express himself, be free, feel everything they want to feel, do whatever they want to do, obviously, as long as it's safe. And then in doing that, they're observing the nature of the child. And then based on the nature, they're supporting that child to fulfill their Dharma, without forcing. And that, the caste system became perverted because somebody's born into the warrior police family, and they all want them to be a police person, and he really wants to be an artist. And they say, no, you have to be a police officer. And so, and the Brahmins especially, because they're considered the highest, they started making all the money. Everybody's giving them money all the time. And then that system became perverted also, because, what happens if you have a little kid who has no interest in spirituality, just wants to do business or be a police officer, so then it became a perverted system. But just really quick, and I'll just touch on this, the caste system is not meant to be an exterior force on society, and that's what it became. It was really meant to be as an observation that there's these different types of people, and based on quality, you're probably going to fit into one of these categories. And that's what that was about. But of course, we tend to mess things up and make it all about we institutionalize everything. So, that's what kind of happened with that.
Interesting. Thanks for that perspective. And so in the time that we have left, I know another passion of yours and another big part of your work is food as medicine, and specifically around a plant-based diet. And that might be really helpful to people who are listening, who are maybe curious. Can you speak to why that's such an important part of your work?
Okay. Sure. Well, first of all, there's lots of indication that with modern science and data, that eating, so first of all, eating a plant-based diet, and when I say plant-based, it can either be 100% vegan or, you know, mostly plants and some animal foods, is shown to be a super healthy diet. You know, as long as it's not processed junk food, you know, like that. Eating whole grains, whole, you know, veggies, grains, lentils, like that, then automatically you're going to be eating a pretty darn relatively healthy diet. Again, these days there's challenges with the, you know, with the GMO and pesticides and things like that. However, for the most part, it's a very good diet. Ayurveda individualizes the diet. There's going to be certain foods that certain body types are going to want to avoid. Like certain body types are going to really want to avoid dairy, while other body types might do better with dairy. If you're, you know, if you're not a pure vegan in that way. So I find that most people benefit by increasing the plants in their diet, whether it's fruits or vegetables or grains or lentils, beans, like that, significantly. 80% of their diet. We've had people just transform their health, their energy, their mental clarity, their mental calm, just by doing that. And there's a lot of good evidence for the benefits of the cardiovascular system, anti-cancer, anti-diabetes. There's a lot of myths out there that, you know, say you need a lot of, you know, basically eating vegetables for a diabetic diet, anti-diabetic, and that's not, I mean, some people can benefit from that, but you're not really training the body how to utilize sugar properly. So to really cure diabetes or type 2 diabetes, that's not a cure, that's really a Band-Aid. So there are ways to literally, through diet, cure some of these maladies. Cardiovascular disease does much better on a high plant-based diet, moderate fat diet. So that's on that level. I mean, there's a lot of different types of plant-based diets, but in a nutshell, there's great benefit to it. On the other level, because if we're looking at what the purpose of life is, knowing yourself, connection to your deeper self, connection to the divine, becoming, you know, on the path towards self-actualization and self-realization, then considering how eating really, you know, be direct, very, very unhealthy, sick animals that have been hugely mistreated on a consistent basis can't be good for our body, and it's not, and it can't be good for the planet. So, I mean, there's a lot of indication now that the mass slaughterhouses on this planet are having some of the most devastating impacts on the environment than any industry, really. So, so that's a reality also. And that, you know, this is my opinion and a lot of people's opinions. This is not meant to offend anybody, because I also ate a lot of meat at some point. And so I went through my own transition. So, you know, if there's a proud vegan, you always remind them, well, you used to eat meat usually too. So, you know, be compassionate, and people go through the processes and changes and phases. But having said that, that once you develop a perspective that that living creature is also a soul, that also has a body, it actually has an ego and a consciousness and a mind and an intelligence. Not the same as a human one, it's different, but it does, and it also responds to love. You know, I mean, if you cuddle a cow or a sheep or a monkey or a pig, they, you know, they get super cute, and they respond to love, they respond to affection. So this idea, this sort of ancient idea that animals don't have souls and they're just meant here so we can slaughter them, I think that's a pretty archaic perspective. You know, you have to do the needful. There's also a principle in Sanskrit, it's called ahimsa. Ahimsa means the principle of not harming other living beings. But sometimes, but what it also says that in this world, it's not possible to never harm other living beings. I mean, right now, even talking, breathing in microbes. I probably walk on many insects throughout the day. You know, if you drive a car, even if you're the most famous vegan on the planet, you're going to inevitably kill other beings. So, you know, there's nothing perfect, but the principle of ahimsa is to minimize the amount of suffering to the greatest degree that we can while maintaining your health. So that's important. I mean, I know some people that really struggled. They really wanted to become vegetarians, and they found it very, very difficult, and they needed a lot of guidance, and they were able to figure out how to do that. Not everybody can jump into it. So it's better for the body, better for the mind, better for the planet, and it relieves the layer of denial that we have to have, that living being, lived a pretty torturous life, and that this was slaughtered, and in sort of a, you don't have to go into graphics, but it doesn't create a healthy, loving vibration on the planet. And at this point, we need more of that. That's my feeling. So that's that in a nutshell, I'd say.
That was a beautiful nutshell.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think you touched on all the really important pieces, and that health is really interconnected, and that we can't really just look at our individual body. I mean, we can, but insofar as we are all connected, and there's this concept of interbeing, and if there's a choice that we can make that's better for us and better for the collective, then why not make that?
Exactly.
And I think I'm going to share this because it's a conversation that I just had yesterday with a family member. And as far as I know, this is not evidence-based at all, but it kind of echoes what you were just saying, Jonathan. So this person has been eating the standard American diet for 79 years, lots of meat, very enthusiastically. And this person has the standard American health challenges, and also has had some mental health issues, depression, anxiety for a lot of decades, really, intractable. And so he had some health scares and finally decided to give a plant-based diet a try. I think it's been 5-6 weeks now. And he called me and he said, I don't know how to explain this, but my mood is better than I can ever remember it being. And how is that related? Is it linked? I don't understand it. And my theory to him was sort of what you just expressed, that, well, you're ingesting, think about what you're ingesting. What we eat literally becomes a part of us. So if it's suffering, grief, rage, fear, a whole lifetime of incredible suffering capped by something horrific, and now that's becoming part of you. Yeah, how could that not affect mood? And so he said, well, show me the data. And I said, well, honestly, I don't think there's any data to support that.
Not yet. And this would come back to pragyaparad, where it's common sense. Sometimes people say, well, a carrot feels. Well, the carrots do have consciousness, but it's not the same level. They don't have the central nervous system. It's not the same. And that, again, you could say that's suffering, okay? Plants do feel, but in a very different way. But, slaughtering a cow or a dog or anything like that is a very different thing. And the amount of suffering that's involved in that is a very, very different thing. And that's common sense. I don't think this is, the science-based realm, it's really great because science is really amazing right now, but it also puts a lot of people in this thing where unless you're backing it up with science, it doesn't mean anything. And that's partly because we've given up our common sense. That's probably because of pragyaparad, but we're just not like going, well, I just know that to be true. It just makes sense. It just makes sense. It's common sense. So.
And maybe that's a good place to finish up. And so I'm just thinking about all the nuggets of wisdom that you've shared with us, Jonathan, in terms of honoring who we are and not fighting it, even if it's not, condoned by the culture or our family of origin, just really deeply connecting to who we know we are at our core level. And that may require getting quiet to even figure that out, because the culture is so loud and so noisy. And understanding that there are multiple facets to who we are, and all of those facets either contribute to or detract from health, our energy body, our spiritual body, physical, mental, and then food is medicine, and being really conscious about what we are ingesting. And I don't know if you have anything else you want to add, but I just want to encourage anybody who's in Massachusetts, if you want to go see Jonathan in person, that will be fabulous. He's got a lot of really good resources on his website or his book. And so feel free to let people know how they can find you.
Sure, that's great, thanks. Yeah, I have a website, healingessencecenter.com, and also totallifecleanse.com, and that's, my book is a Total Life Cleanse. So a lot of the topics that we were talking about today are in that book in detail. You know, you'll learn all about the doshas and Ayurveda and Pragyaparad, but also all about the toxins and the stressors to health. It covers all of that. And then there is a cleanse involved too. So for people that want to go through a gradual, safe, sane cleanse, you know, feel free to contact me. We do online groups. I do one-on-ones with people. So be happy. So people actually can do that at a distance. Now with technology, in fact, I did a cleanse last night. We only had 3 people live, and we had like 8 people, you know, at a distance. So it was kind of fun.
Great.
So, yeah. So healingessencecenter.com and totallifecleanse.com.
Jonathan Glass, thank you so very much for sharing your wisdom. Really appreciate it.
It was really fun. Thank you. Great questions too.